The CIA once considered sending the Soviets condoms that were large labeled small to convince them that the US was well endowed. People ask Reddit, what's an NSFW fact about history that we don't get to hear too often? There is a legal penis size in Iceland. It's an old law from the Middle Ages after a woman was married off to a man and on her wedding night was so disappointed with how small his penis was that she took him back to the church to have an annulment. Because of her, a law was made that a man must be at least 3 inches while hard to marry. There is a wonderful documentary called The Final Member in which this is an actual problem. Reply: if a man could not perform in bed during the Middle Ages, England, the wife could have her marriage annulled. But it had to be proved in the church courts. So midwives might be called to palpate his member to see if there was a medical reason for it, or prostitutes might be called for their expert knowledge. Roman troops were provided cow intestines condoms, as STD epidemics could decide the fate of entire wars. There is a carving on the side of the belfry in Ghent that depicts a man suckling the breast of a woman. The story is that the man was condemned to die unless he could prove his innocence by surviving imprisonment without food for 40 days. He could have visitors during his imprisonment, but they of course were checked for food. His daughter visited him every day. She was a wet nurse. He was let go after 40 days having survived. Shi Peipu was a Chinese opera singer turned spy active during the 1960s. He pretended to be a woman for 20 years to seduce a French embassy employee and obtain classified documents. His charade went so far as to fake a pregnancy and purchase a child and pretend it was theirs. He managed to fool everyone, including his lover, for over 2 decades before finally being exposed to the world. In ancient Egypt, soldiers proved their battle prowess by presenting the severed penises of their slaughtered enemies. Traditionally, severed hands were presented, but in 1182 BC Libyans and other allies invaded Egypt and were defeated by the army of Ramses III, and Ramses suspected that some soldiers were claiming extra credit by presenting the hands of women as well as the male soldiers. So he demanded penises instead. His victory inscriptions mention 12,535 foreskins and hands, and has images of the piles of the body parts at the Medinet Habu mortuary temple. Back during the Age of Sail, sailors would go months and months without any women or any privacy. When they'd get to port, hundreds of prostitutes would take boats out to the ships to greet the sailors, who would almost all have sex with at least one. This included the ship's boys. Like I said, there was no privacy at all. The crew would share one huge room, dozens or hundreds of men sleeping in hammocks slung 28 apart. So the ensuing copulation took place in the wide open, hundreds of people having sex all over the ship in plain sight. This wasn't a rare thing. It was almost universal, though some more religious captains wouldn't let the prostitutes on board. STDs were therefore incredibly common. Side point: British sailors got a full ration of rum equal to 8 shots every day. If they were not long out of port, they got a full gallon of beer daily. When people complain about moral decay of society, it really just means to me that they don't know about history. Society is quite chaste today compared to much of the past. Reply: my dad was in the US Navy during Vietnam, stationed on an aircraft carrier. There was a group of prostitutes that followed the ship around wherever it took port. The prostitutes knew where the ship was going next before the sailors did. All the documentaries you see about hieroglyphs in ancient Egypt neatly avoid showing you the fertility rites where the pharaoh's phallus is inseminating the land. The actual death of Ratcliffe, you know, the oddly proportioned villain from Pocahontas? From the Encyclopedia Virginia. The colonists, led by Captain John Ratcliffe, walked into an ambush. About 33 men, or 2/3 of their number, were killed. The Indians captured Ratcliffe, and their women skinned him alive using mussel shells. If you want to support our new channel, please hit the like and subscribe button. We would also love to read some feedback in the comments. Thank you very much. Ferdinand VII of Spain had a huge dong, so much in fact that it's rumored that one of his wives died of a hemorrhage derived from having sex with the monarch. He almost died without an heir because he couldn't have sex with the queen consorts without any damage. He only had a daughter, and he had to go through hell to change some old laws that prevented his daughter from reigning. At the Temple of Aphrodite in Cyprus, overlooking the legendary birthplace of Aphrodite, Young virgin girls would tie a bowstring around their head and await a man to come along and throw a silver coin of any value into their lap. The man would say, "I demand thee," in the name of the goddess. The girl then had to have sex with the man. In this way the girl would make her first fruit offering to Aphrodite. It is said that some girls had to come back for many days before they were chosen. In 1488 an Italian noblewoman Caterina Sforza Riario locked herself in a castle to save herself from her enemies. Her enemies managed to capture her children and threatened to kill them if she wouldn't surrender. She climbed on ramparts, lifted her skirt to expose her female parts and shouted, "Fools! Don't you see that I can make myself more children?" Reply: her descendants found their way into the current British and Spanish royal families. Whenever I watch historical dramas about people fighting over thrones and whatnot, I look up everyone's descendants to see who won in the long term. In colonial America, a guy was arrested and charged because he drew a lewd image of his wife in the snow. Puritans didn't appreciate the art. Astronomer here. In 1992, two astronauts did not disclose they were married to NASA until it was too late to replace one of them, and thus became the first married couple in space. While the two astronauts in question are not the kiss and tell types, most people assume this means space sex has happened. Obviously you don't have to be married to try it, but it does make it harder to figure out the couples. NASA's official stance is that it hasn't, but I'm not sure people really believe them. Reply: I mean, it's not like you have to be married for space sex to happen. What happens in space stays in space, as they say. The CIA once considered sending the Soviets condoms that were large labeled small to convince them that the US was well endowed. From the 13th to the 15th of February the Romans celebrated Lupercalia, Roman precursor of Valentine's Day, which was a festival of love and fertility. Priests would sacrifice a goat and then cut the goat skin into pieces. Part of this they would wear on their heads, and other parts were cut into thongs. The men would then run around the city of Rome naked, hitting as many women with these thongs as they possibly could. Being hit would help with pregnancy or becoming pregnant. So depending on what they wanted, the women would either deliberately stand in the way of the men, or try to run away while pretty much everyone was naked. In another part of the festivities, men would draw names of women from a jar, and the goal was that they'd stay together for the duration of the festival. This would often result in a lot of, intercourse, and sometimes people actually fell in love and got married after they met during Lupercalia. Read about Captain Cook. He discovered Hawaii. They docked offshore right at harvest time. The natives thought they were fertility gods and sent their women in canoes to the ship. The crew had a blast year after year, until the natives figured out what was happening. King Tut's first wife was his half-sister. But she also may have been his full sister, and even at one point may have been his stepmother. Reply: incest was actually encouraged in ancient Egypt, as in many aristocracies, to keep the bloodline pure. Moreover, if there were twins where one was a boy and one was a girl, they were married at birth because it was assumed that they must have banged in the womb. In ancient Egypt they held a fertility festival each year, and at this festival it was the pharaoh's responsibility to strip down and jerk off into the Nile. Should also mention that once the pharaoh had finished, men in the crowd were encouraged to step forward and join in, so once a year the Nile River literally tuned into a massive public circle jerk. Reply: according to their mythology, the Nile was created when one of the gods jerked off. It's a river of God spooge. Reply: similar to Milky Way. According to Greek mythology, it was created when Hera was breastfeeding Hercules. Apparently, he was a nip biter, and clamped down so hard, she had to violently pull him off from her breast and accidentally squirted her milk around. The deadliest female serial killer in US history had murdered 35 people with an axe by the time she was 18 years old. Her name was Clementine Barnabet, member of a cult called the Church of Sacrifice. Preferred murdering several family members at once, often decapitating them. Not so fun fact, she was out of prison before she was 30 and never seen again. I'd rather not know what her actual body count was. During wartime some armies would wipe poop on their spear so that when they stabbed/slashed enemies they'd get that extra poison damage. Reply: in medieval times, they would sling dead animals via catapult to spread disease, which was devastating in those times due to lack of proper medicine. It seems biological warfare was the world's actual first weapon of mass destruction. Thank you for listening to another B-Town Reddit Stories episode. Hit the subscribe button and check out our channel for more stories. Let us know your opinion about this topic in the comments.